So today we turn to the London School of Economics and Political Science, or LES. And I think this is certainly a very valid question to be asking in the wake of the vote.eu leave scandal about the funding. And for people who are going to complain and say, oh, no, it's not, we know that the more funding a political party has, the more influence and the more votes it wins. Money in politics and their ability to be able to spend does matter. So the very fact that this unofficial Leave campaign not only overspent, but he's now, they are now pursuing a criminal investigation because as the Electoral Commission investigated this, they said, we're finding them to the maximum extent we can, but we think they even overspent by even more. So the allegations of overspending and corruption surrounding Vote Leave's campaign are a good enough reason to declare the 26 referendum void, argues Ewan McGaughey, and explains the relevant law. He concludes that the greater a vote's impact, the greater it must be its integrity. There must be a bigger question to consider. Whether we want to redo the referendum until technology is made safer for democracy. So the rule of law and parliamentary democracy must always be defended. They enable a free and just society. People can only speak, organise and vote freely when the law empowers them to do so equally. We call ourselves a democracy because our laws ban the buying of votes and power. We are not an oligarchy, where politics is decided by the highest spenders from golden elevators. This is why the legality of the Brexit poll matters. The organisers of Vote Leave have been accused of fraud, of thieving personal files and using billionaire cash to corrupt democracy. If the evidence proves true, and this enables a judicial declaration that the Brexit referendum is void, the notification under Article 50 must be nullified and Parliament to take back control. So we limit spending and foreign interference in our elections to make them fair. If elections for a Member of Parliament are corrupted by illegality, they shall be declared invalid at common law. As the Electoral Reform Committee said in 1947, voting illegalities are not just private wrongs, but attempts to wreck the machinery of representative government and an attack upon national institutions. Vote Leave spent at least £625,000 over its 7 million limit. It does not matter if it was separate legal entities that may have done the spending, because the conclusion is that fraud unravels everything. Did spending fraud sway the result? Just 634,000 out of the 300.5 million voters, the 1.88 needed to switch to Leave over Remain. The overspent cash was spent on online advertising targeting a people based on individual psychological profiles, according to evidence heard by the House of Lords Committee in March 2018. These profiles were built through Facebook and other data without consent or knowledge of the UK voters. They were taken through a Facebook application made by Cambridge psychologist called Alexander Kogan, who sold it to a New York corporation called Cambridge Analytica LEC, owned by an American billionaire, Rupert Mercer, a strategic communications group. The data was then sold to a Canadian corporation hired by Vote Leave to target UK voters. They used the most psychological manipulative technology known, exceeding spending limits in the process. We cannot know the causative impact that the alleged spending fraud had on vote leave. In law, that uncertainty is even more of a reason that the referendum is void. Overspending not only changed the result on the balance of probabilities, it materially increased the risk of a corrupt vote, and not just some council by-election. The greater a vote's impact, the greater must be the vote's integrity. These are the allegations that remain there are allegations that remain overspent. This makes the vote even more corrupt and utterly void. Oh yeah, I want to point out that there is no actual evidence that remain overspent, by the way. So a court can declare any corrupt vote void. If it does, this nullifies the Prime Minister's notification to the EU of the UK's intention to leave. Any use of power to notify the UK's intention to withdraw would be irrational. And to take into account an irrelevant factor, a corrupt Brexit vote, notification to negotiate to leave the EU under Article 50 must follow the UK's own constitutional requirements. The UK must unilaterally revoke the notification, like in the private law of contract. Even if this were a question of EU law, the answer the treaties require must be one that the European Union holds together, and that not that one that allows it to be torn apart. The summary does not even scratch the surface of the evidence of Brexit's corruption. And the Brexit referendum can also be void if there are broadcasts from a place outside the UK that includes a programme on an electronic communications network. This is clear that Russian bots were active on Twitter. The ripple effect is incalculable. YouTube has stayed silent about its network, while Facebook has issued denials that it was exploited. Even though Russian bots were targeting American voters around the same time, even though Putin's Russia has supported UKIP, the ADF, Le Pen and Le Nord, YouTube and Facebook have not yet been forced to disclose data about the activity on their platforms. Nor does this scratch the allegation that the reported 4,350,000 donation from Saudi Arabia to the DUP to be used for Brexit does not take a Sherlock Holmes to guess a motive for the petrol states deports who export our 60 or 83% fossil fuels to fund causes like the DUPs or the UKIPs who deny climate change. David Cameron saw it coming. If the law is not enforced, the rule of law is in jeopardy. To stop the advance of the far right in Europe, the UK government should go to Brussels with a new mission, a big, new, open offer to unite for full employment on fairer wages through democracy in a free society. So, some say Brexit has gone too far, that it cannot be stopped. The judiciary has no role. But in our constitution, while the courts do not control Parliament, their first duty is to control the executive. It is said that courts listening on the rule of law are enemies of the people, and that the British sovereignty is being lost to tyrannical Europe. But the Rotherhams, the Barclays and the Murdochs say nothing about the tyranny that the UK will face against the bargaining power of corporations who will bend the rules of international trade. Within a few years after the UK was formed, it was brought to the brink by a government infected with corruption, with the world's first stock market crash. Vote Leave proponents who feel their heritable characteristics entitle them to wealth and power may or may not know their history, but in 1720 the government fell. And as evidence of bribes and corruption were revealed by the Postmaster General committed suicide, the Chancellor was imprisoned in the Tower London for his fraud, and 300 years later the UK's constitution is stronger. But there are just over 300 days to save the UK from territorial and moral collapse. We have time to deliberate and act, not whether we want to have a second referendum, but on why the far right were spilling their beans and counting their eggs. Parliament must deliberate whether we want to redo the first referendum until technology is made safe for democracy. We must uphold the rule of law, or integrity, or our integrity is not safe and not for sale. And that's a valid argument, I think. If even if you were a vote leave, and as the Electoral Commission have pointed out, yeah, you overspent, and we know that overspending does influence elections. So you cheated in an election. Can you honestly say, and you are proud, that your side won on something that isn't fair? Can you honestly say that the Brexit referendum's integrity was held intact? And the more and more this comes out, the more and more it's looking that this is that it was complete fraud, that the integrity of the vote has been jeopardised, and that it's very likely Remain won. We cannot underestimate this, and I think there should be a redo based on this, and that argument makes it very clear. The rule of law, if the judiciary find that they haven't, and remember the Electoral Commission has said that there is strong evidence to do so, that they overspent and that this nullifies the vote, then absolutely Article 50 should be revoked, and that we need to really be careful upon this. And then we have to ask, as it says at the end, we have to really ask that question: do we need to, whether or not we want to redo the referendum until technology is made safe for democracy? That's a very valid argument, I think. I don't think you can disagree with anything this guy says. I think that's a very valid argument.